Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is a leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security to defend Israel. It's a great pleasure to be joined once again by Danny Seaman, who is going to be providing today's briefing. Thanks, of course, to all of the viewers and supporters for tuning in. If you have any questions throughout this briefing, please, of course, feel free to share them in the chat. Or as always, you can email or message me before, during, or after so that we can make sure to incorporate your questions into future briefings. Danny, good to see you.
Very happy to be here, as always.
So, Danny, you have a radio show here in Israel, and you talk about things related to the war. So, for all of our viewers who don't listen to your radio program
the Hebrew
in Israel in Hebrew, why don't you share with us a little bit about what you spoke about today?
All right. The show is very early in the morning in Israel time. So if anybody knows Hebrew, it's on Galei Israel Radio. It's 6 o'clock in the morning on Thursdays. And if you know Hebrew and you're up at that time, if you're abroad and up at that time, you're more than welcome to join in. I usually go through the headlines and address the major issues. Right now, I understand that I have to give the military aspect today as well. So just the updates from the news today. The operation in Gaza has reached a pinnacle in the sense that, as I'm sure a lot of you have realized, if you're on social media, all eyes are on Rafah. There's this campaign going on, and indeed we are in Rafah. And we've taken over the most important stretch of land there in the Rafah area, which borders on Egypt. And we discovered over 50 tunnels entering Israel. And there were other events going on that I'll address in a moment. Israel had 3 soldiers who fell yesterday, 2 in a terrorist attack in the Samaria area, and 1 paratrooper who fell in combat in Gaza. This follows 3 soldiers from the Nahal Brigade who fell in action day before yesterday. And I mentioned them today because today the IDF released that they were killed as they were exposing tunnel piers that were coming out of an UNRWA facility school in the medical facility within an UNRWA school in Rafah. And as they were searching for things there based on intelligence that they received, there was a booby-trapped tunnel in that hospital, in that medical facility, and the 3 soldiers were killed by the booby trap within the United Nations Relief Works Association school in Rafah. And this goes on with other things that have been discovered, as I mentioned before, in Gaza. One of them is the tunnels that we discovered there along the border that allowed them to bring in weapons from Iran, and also that were Americans provided the Egyptians, and somehow these were smuggled into the hands of Hamas. These are not things, and Egypt controls that border. These are not things that you can just smuggle through in your pockets. These are in a pocketbook. These are heavy-duty equipment that the Egyptians either turned a blind eye to or were complacent and cooperative with. The other thing that was going on there was that incident that we had the other day that unfortunately when the Prime Minister addressed the issue, we did not know at that time that Israel actually had nothing to do with it. This was when we had taken out 2 of the leaders there. And also yesterday, Israel revealed that this was a stolen gasoline and other products that the Hamas stole that from the materials being brought in to the Arabs living in Rafah area. And they use this, and they smuggle it into this location among the tents, hiding it, and was hit mistakenly, not by one of our weapons, but by ricochet, and it ignited and had this huge fire that we've all seen in the media. It was very quick, once again, to take over the, sorry, hold on a second. Liat? My wife left something cooking on the stove, and it just turned off the stove, and the gas was leaking here. So we could have had a very exciting incident going on here right now, and with an explosion here, which would have nothing to do but I could have blamed it on Hamas, just like they do all the time. So anyway, my wife's taking care of that right now. So not to belittle the things that are going on in Gaza, this is very much being used. And I saw somebody or mention something about the PR war that we'll address this in a moment. So those are the major issues going on right now here in the battle. Judea and Samaria have become very much of a focal point where we have terrorists of the Hamas firing at the Israeli towns along the Green Line from the areas in Judea and Samaria towards Israeli towns and kibbutzim in the center of Israel. Lital Shemesh, who is a leading Israeli news anchor, she also is has a book that's How Much is a Dead Jew Worth, which she writes about this whole effort on the part of the PLO to pay anybody who's engaged in terrorism and murdering Israelis. Yesterday they informed, this we're talking about the PA, not Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, that the Americans and the Europeans want to impose upon us as the people in control of Gaza the day after. This same authority yesterday offered or said it will pay between 500 to 1,500 shekels to any Arab filming themselves firing in the direction of Israel. So we have that incident going on, and things will be increasing in Judea and Samaria in the next few weeks. We should anticipate that.
Danny, thank you so much for that. Why don't we jump into this important question, which I think is you mentioned about Israel's supposed failure at public diplomacy and PR. I have to tell you, Danny, I literally get countless amounts of emails and messages on a regular basis asking, why is Israel so bad at PR? Why does Israel fail miserably at public diplomacy? I can't even respond to all the people who send these messages and questions in. And I always want to kind of respond and say, just because we may be losing a battle or two or the war doesn't mean Israel's not trying. And I don't always understand if people realize that there's a lot of anti-Semitism out there. There's a lot of Islamic countries out there. So maybe you can address this issue. To what extent is Israel not putting up a good fight, or to what extent is it just a really hard fight to win?
Well, since I'm a Mets fan, and anybody here who follows baseball and the Mets themselves know what a pathetic situation is, so I feel very comfortable with Israeli hasbara, as we call it. Already in that, just so you know, the meaning of the word hasbara is explaining. And for many years, we felt like, all we have to do is explain ourselves. People understand, and people are genuinely trying to be objective and want to know the facts. That's not what's happening here. Yes, first off, we're at a huge disadvantage because the numbers, even if we have all the Christian supporters of Israel in the world that say every evangelical is a supporter of Israel, every 70 million or 100 million around the world, they're still, the Islamic world is still 10 times larger than Israel. Not all the Christians support Israel first, or evangelicals. Second, not all Jews support Israel. A lot of them are used, and it can be the ultra-Orthodox Neturei Karta, and it can be some of these idiotic students in universities in the United States. So we don't have these absolute numbers. So the numbers war, we're already at a disadvantage. But there are platforms and there's money. It's not a total loss because and today with the advent of social media, and I mentioned this before, it does give us the ability not to even out, but more of an access to the general public. And we have to address to those, as I said, usually, maybe today it's more around 35% support the Arabs in this conflict, and maybe 10 to 15% support us. But there's still a large percentage of people who are not really there, and you have to address the efforts to them. And with them, we're doing a pretty good job. Now, today on the radio station, and I want to address this because it was very interesting. I spoke to a former member of Knesset from the Labor Party, Dr. Einat Wilf. Some of you may know her. I know her back in the day when I worked at our consulate in New York back in the 80s. We had something called the Israel high school delegation. We literally had over 50 kids once a year coming to the United States and going to schools across the United States to talk about their lives in Israel. This was before social media. This was sort of a social media effort. And these kids did a wonderful job of getting our message across and introducing people, high school kids, to Israel. Einat was one of these outstanding pupils back then in the 80s. So I know her all this time, and throughout her career, and she's a doctor now, she has engaged in this whole effort of what we call the cognitive, psychological warfare, et cetera, et cetera. So I brought her on today, and she raised an issue that was very interesting. I've seen it in other places, but she sort of connected the dots here. And her point, the important point she said here was that the war with Hamas right now is not the main battle. The battlefield is the cognitive warfare, is that attempt to delegitimize the state of Israel, to make the Jewish right to self-determination something that is negative, to cast the Jew, which was historically, and playing on these historic anti-Semitic themes, which have now taken on a modern adaptation to fit the modern world. If in the past you could have the simple blood libel, or you could have religious accusations against Jews, today, because the Western world is less religious, so they won't go in with the blood libel of Jews making matzah with the blood of Christian children, but accusing the Jews and other things such as the selective application of laws and international law. All these things are part of the effort to delegitimize Israel. And this is an effort that Iran has set out to achieve back since the day of their creation. This is the main goal. The major success they had in this effort, and the Arabs, not only the Iranians, but other jihadist Arab countries, was with the Durban conference in South Africa back 20 years ago, that they set the details for everything we're engaging in today was starting out there. And the purpose of the battle with Israel through Hamas and through the terrorist organizations is not only to have Israel engaged in a war of our attrition to weaken us physically, but it's also to do exactly what they achieved and succeeded in doing, which is growing the international outcry and indignation against Israel. And this has been, they've been tremendously successful with this. And here what happens is that when you have countries like Spain, Ireland, and others, it's not only for international law or international politics, they're joining in with the Iranian effort to annihilate Israel by putting Israel outside of the pale, by making Israel something that is totally unacceptable. And this is not among the dozens of Arab countries around the world and Muslim countries. This is through the international community. And you see this, and we've been seeing this recently occurring here. So Israel has what's happening in Gaza, especially Lebanon, Judea and Samaria. All of these things are just the sides. It's to create the conditions for the major battle, which is that battle of public opinion, in order to outcast the Jewish people in its personification through the state of Israel.
So, Daniel, let me ask you a question. This is not a new battle.
Right.
You've been fighting this for many, many years. Do we have any examples of when there was a war, a terrorist attack, whatever that was happening in the news cycle, and Israel engaged in a very specific approach to public diplomacy, and it worked? And we can look back at that and say, wow, we need to replicate that model as opposed to just firing all over and seeing what sticks.
Well, I said this in other briefings that we had, and it was like 11 years ago when I was with the Ministry of Public Diplomacy. It was the first time we used social media. And when I say social media, the effort was done by the public and students in universities and students that have more time on their hands. And this was, I didn't even have Facebook at that time. To me, it was an invasion of privacy. And we saw for the first time, and I said this to the prime minister at the time, that for the first time in 30 years that I engaged in public diplomacy, for the first time I'd seen a game changer. And I explained to Netanyahu what I had seen there and why we should be putting our efforts, and the government should be taking a step back and letting the public take over. The government didn't really do that. I ran into problems within the system. People weren't too happy about stepping back and letting the public do it, but it happened naturally. There wasn't even this whole aspect of influencers at the time. The advantages in the public doing this is that they're free of the restrictions in government. They're free not only of the bureaucratic restrictions, they're free also of the mental restrictions. Government bureaucracy moves very slowly. They have abilities, especially younger generations, and today we're talking about even high school students and younger who are engaged in this kind of battle, and even if they don't want to be, they're exposed to it, and they find it necessary to understand and know, and they become foot soldiers in this battle themselves. So if anybody's not following what's going on with their kids, believe me, they're being exposed to this. I see it. I've seen it with my own. So there are many advantages with this, and we saw huge successes at the time. The Arabs at that time, 11 years ago, were taken by surprise because they didn't know, and they weren't expecting us to respond the way we did. And why would they? Because we've always been terrible at it. This was successful even a year later after the abduction of the three young boys in Judea and the murder of them at the time. Sounds familiar to what we experienced recently, only not at the broader scale. So what we experienced on October 7th, we've been experiencing throughout the years, only not at the scale that we experienced it on October 7th. But at that time, a year later, also, these students organized and did a very good job. And you have lots of those remnants of that happening today. So in that sense, there is a lot of success. And as I said before, every one of you, every one of us, we're part of this. You spread the information that you have, you share things, you like people who are, you like the posts that are giving out to give it exposure. Now we have great efforts against us. As I mentioned when we began this conversation about Rafah, and you've seen this campaign of the bleeding hearts and all the self-righteous young people around the world and actors and influencers were saying about all eyes on Rafah, there was a counter to that done by Jews and Israelis and was very successful. And Meta and Instagram blocked it and shut it down. They didn't do that for Rafah. And what was the Israeli or the Jewish counter or the pro-Israeli counter was all eyes on our hostages. If your eyes are on Rafah, help us find our hostages. There were these kind of takes on that, and it was blocked. And you find that a lot of Jewish content, a lot of pro-Israel content is blocked or given less exposure. But you have to fight that by going on and sharing things and bringing out the information and getting it out to people that you know are interested in learning about it, not fighting, not, I admit, and I've said this before, I've reached a point that not with those who are just listening, those who are totally anti-Israeli, I don't engage them, I just curse them out. I lost my Instagram account, unfortunately, because of that, so I don't recommend that. It made me feel better, I admit, but if you really want to be engaged in this, it's basically sharing and spreading the content that pro-Israeli, hoping that when these outlets, when they give suggested to anybody who's in there, you see these suggested posts, when they get people who are not necessarily involved, either pro or anti-Israeli, they may see this and be educated on it and have a more positive response to Israel.
Danny, let me ask you, this cognitive warfare you're speaking about, is it only targeting the international community, or is there also an attempt to go for Israelis and the young generation here in Israel?
Well, we have to do that. That's one of the things we.
I mean, on the other side.
Oh, on the other side.
Enemies, are they trying to build support just abroad or also within the fabric of Israeli society?
Not with. Well, there are Russians involved in this. Let's not forget we mentioned the Muslims before, but Russia and China are very much engaged and trying to undermine Israel. They're doing this with a lot of bots that are coming in and doing things in Hebrew. It's very easy, and you find that this younger generation, as irritated as we may be by their being involved all the time with their, my kids are like this, and I'm sure anybody who has young kids knows that this is usually the where their kids are focused. But it also makes them a little smarter to manipulative content, and they're very aware of it. The Arabs are not trying to do that. They don't care about us. What they're trying to do is create this animosity to Israel internationally. So they don't want to engage Israeli kids because then they'll start getting reactions and responses to it. And they don't want that. What they want is just brainwashing people internationally and playing on their feelings of needing, their virtual signaling and the self-righteousness. And this is a good cause. Everybody wants to be a good cause and save the planet today and save whatever they can. Back in the 70s, the Arabs were hijacking planes. Back in the 80s, they were kidnapping and hijacking journalists. Now they're hijacking agendas. And so they've taken over the gay agenda. They've taken over the global warming agenda. They're taking over all these sometimes imbecilic agendas that are affecting the youth in the West, and they're hijacking it for their efforts. And unfortunately, they've been very successful at it.
Thank you so much, Danny. I want to take a moment to share something important with all of our viewers. I hope everyone can see this right now. Since October 8th, we have been doing these daily briefings. They have been very important to really spread the truth about what is happening in Israel. And as Danny is speaking about this cognitive warfare, we're doing our little piece to share the truth, to bring you the experts. Since October 8th, these briefings have really reached a wide audience. Many different types of people, types of backgrounds, and types of influence, whether they work in government in Israel or abroad, very influential people who have been able to take what we are educating, what we are sharing, and really make a difference. And therefore, I would appeal to everyone who is viewing this briefing to help us out and to find someone and share these briefings with them, encourage them to sign up. Right now on the screen, you have a link where you can share this briefing very easily, bit.ly/IDSF. If you go to that link or you share that link with a friend, they can sign up for these briefings as well. And if you go to that link, you'll see on the sign up page for the Zoom briefings, there are little circles on the right side of the page, the social media circles, and you can click any one of those and share this sign up page. You can put it on your Facebook, you can put it on your X and your LinkedIn, and you can also click that bottom button with the envelope and you can email it to a friend and ask them, encourage them to sign up. And I can't overstate the great value to our organization and to everything we are trying to do by encouraging additional people to sign up for these briefings. And as many of you know, we also take these briefings and we post them on YouTube. So if you're watching this briefing on YouTube, I'd also encourage you to subscribe to our channel, to really share this far and wide, to allow us to educate, allow us to do our part to bring the truth of what is happening here in Israel to the world. And with that, Danny, thank you for allowing me to make that little advertisement, Danny. We have just a few minutes left, and anything you'd like to share with our audience before we close out
I went through some of the questions here. As somebody told me about what to do on TikTok, I have to say I'm sorry, on X or whatever it's called these days, on Twitter, what used to be Twitter. I'm not on Twitter because when I first was introduced to it, I saw that many of the media journalists were on there. And I know how horrible they were from my personal experience with many of them. And to me, Twitter was a cesspool, so I never got into it. So thank you for the whoever raised that issue there for the advice, but I'm not on that. I'm on Facebook and on Instagram. But others who are there, I do recommend locating a lot of the influencers, as they're called, people that have lots of people following them. Some of them have been on the briefings here. They're very good. They're very accurate. If it's somebody you're not familiar with, I would be very careful with but once you find somebody and you see they're accurate and they're very careful, then I suggest following them and sharing their material. Also, by the way, we've mentioned this before, part of my effort, since I'm too old to be in the battlefield, and we have mentioned how the real battlefield is the cognitive warfare, anybody who wants to do briefing for their synagogue, for their church, for their community, I'm more than happy to be available for this. We don't charge for that, especially if it's on Zoom. And when I'm here and I'm up late at night, it's okay. If you want to give a contribution to the IDSF, I won't be opposed to that. but generally I'm more than happy to make myself available. That's the battle that I fight, and that's what I enlist myself for. So if anybody wants to take advantage of that, I'd be more than happy to be at your disposal.
Danny, Seaman, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. And again, if any of you are in Manhattan on Sunday and you stop by the Israel Day Parade, try to give a shout out and a wave to the IDSF float. And we will be back with you here in Israel Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.